Hey, everybody. Welcome to our latest webinar on scaling software distribution for hardware companies. Have a very exciting panel today. Two of my favorite people in the whole world. We've got Daniel Spofford, who's our CTO, and Eric Loes. So we'll do a quick intro and then get into it. So first off, my name is Bill Brock. I'm CEO of Peridio. Peridio, we do software distribution for hardware companies, the topic for today. And next, Daniel, do you say some things?
Yeah, Daniel Spofford, CTO at Peridio. I do the same work as Bill.
At scale. He
At
scales my
scale.
work.
Yeah.
Then Eric.
Hi, Eric Loes, head of software engineering at Telly. Telly's a new startup where we're trying to do the unthinkable by giving away free television that's fully ad subsidized to consumers. And it's a bit of a take trying to put evolution back into the television, where we have a dual screen, built-in sound bar, full mic array camera, the whole 9 yards in it, and really building beyond television type features along with traditional TV.
Thanks, Eric. And prior to Telly, Eric was the head of software over Visio. And so we'll get to a little bit of a lightning round at the end of the call. Lessons learned from AWS IoT at scale. So that'll be fun. All right, so before we jump in, a little bit about us. Peridio is a platform for software distribution and management of modern connected devices, very much like Telly's use case here. And we help our customers build robust and secure distributed products at large scale. We do this in a few ways. We support release phasing so that when you actually go to issue an update into the field, you have the ability to very carefully sequence an update out to all of your devices. We support very flexible management of the embedded software. More on this in a little bit. Cohort-based collaboration and distribution workflows to centralize the activities around debug, release, and then getting into the production field. And also, lastly, device management and secure remote access. So getting into it today, we have really three topics, and I'll drop the screen share in a second, so you're not looking at the screen share the whole time. But I want to talk through the business impact of firmware updates, when you should build or buy a firmware management platform, and then really scaling your update operations and some of the best practices and lessons learned taking products to production. So with that, I'm going to stop this share. And we'll just get into it. So today, very excited about having Eric here, and some of our earliest conversations with the Telly team and their founder, Ilya, is around the idea that updates should be an exciting experience for the customers. And I remember Ilya talking to us early on about really wanting to build Telly after Tesla, and that every time an update should go out into the field, it should be celebrated, and it should be treated as features, not necessarily like a begrudging acceptance of, oh, I have to take this update. So Eric, can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like in practice and what you guys have done to really have the update process be celebrated by the customer base?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the excitement of Telly obviously is it's this free TV, but what we're trying to really say is free TV doesn't mean a bad product, right? We want to build high level features and highly usable features and features that get users excited. And so with that, software and firmware deliverable and reliability is key, right? We want a smooth, quick process for the customers. You don't want it to be a burden. And so I think over the last year and a half, as we've been evolving the software, you can kind of see how we continue to get better at that reliability. Obviously, with your guys' help drastically in that area. And also, a lot of things that we talk about, like firmware for television, can be very large download. And how can we break this up and start delivering in chunks so that most users want to turn their TV on at 6 p.m. and watch TV. They don't want to think about software update. So how can we deliver that software update and then obviously celebrate it? And so, through a lot of your infrastructure and stack, we have a lot of events kicking off. We're looking at automating release notes so that, as the moment that you download that software and install it on the TV, we're sending out user notes to the end user. We're even thinking about bringing release notes and onto the TV itself, so that the first time you turn it on, you're like, "This is what's new about your television." We want people to be excited about new features. It's also a great way to get users directly into the new features we built. It's not an organic, but we can actually push them directly in. And so we can quickly learn or pivot on those features based on some of these experiences that we're building and leveraging your guys' system.
And so when you're doing this, like things have changed over the last few years at Telly. So what did it look like running releases early on versus where you are right now?
Yeah, painful. Like with any new hardware system. Outside just the general setup, I would say before, we first started with kind of like a monolith install, right? So we had this really big, clunky firmware download install. Most consumers don't have, shockingly, 1 gig internet and can download everything in 2-3 minutes. So when you have those monolith installed, that puts a real burden on your customer, right? And some of our early stuff, just because we weren't mature yet, like we were still, doing like power on and doing a check for update. And so we would be catching a lot of users in that 6 p.m. window or 7 p.m. when they're ready to watch. And then you're talking about, a 20-30 minute install process. So I think the maturity of our system, and working with you guys, is breaking that down so that, we don't have to install a 4 or 5 gig file every single time, and getting it into smaller chunks. And then hopefully, by the end of the year, Q1, we're looking at finally getting to silent updates. So there's no, power on check for updates whatsoever. So, I mean, I think the big key here is like, you want to ensure your own success, right? And so obviously the easiest success is bundle everything together and install one path. Get that going, make sure that you're seeing updates within a certain time window frame, whatever your KPI metrics are. And then once you get that reliability, you can start enhancing it. And so I think that's what, we've been doing over the last year, is enhancing that, breaking it into smaller pieces, ensuring those successes as well. And then, and constantly improving the customer experience as we go along with that.
It's kind of an interesting part of consumer, like IoT, IoT in general, but like especially in consumer IoT, because there is a user involved, and oftentimes, the varying personas of consumers, um, makes me think of like security cameras is another one. TVs is a really good example, but it's off. You want it to, for a variety of reasons, it's off a lot of the time, and
Yep.
it's not able to do something in the background. I bring up security cameras as like another case there, because a lot of like home cameras are in some low power state. They're not like wanting to download in that moment, and they only turn on, when activity is detected. And yeah, it kind of creates this problem where you have to juggle, well, we're doing that for a reason. Most people don't want their TV on at, in the middle of the night, just maybe you forgot it on, but yeah, you kind of have to find that optimal use case of, well, when is the best time to update? And that
Yep.
dovetails in all sorts of conversations like that you kind of touched on. How fast is the download? Can we break it up? Um, Breaking up the download, is easy to say those words out loud, but that has like foundational impacts on both the people building the product as well as the consumers of it. So
Yep.
yeah, it's a fun problem space.
Yeah, it's really funny, at least in the consumer space, just through like the history of being in the TV space. The best time to actually update a TV is like 5 minutes after a user has turned it off. Because like high reliability, someone's not be like, oh, I need to go turn it back on. They're typically done with their viewing session at that point. So, and so for every consumer product, or you can find those windows and figure out what those usage behaviors are, and then ensure that you're doing that update. We wanted to do it at first at the beginning on a power on, even though we knew it was going to be a customer hit, so that our beta users actually saw that we were updating their TV, because we promised
Mhm.
from the get-go that our goal was to update it at least once every 2 months. So we've been doing, around 6-week release cadences for the consumer side. And so, part of that message is like, you get a TV, but we're constantly updating it. And we want to make sure that they saw that. And, now as we're shifting more to a production rollout, obviously, those are some of the things that we need to start improving and making sure it's a better experience for a wider audience.
How do you guys go about actually organizing and managing a release?
Yeah, so well, we build a lot of firmware. So I mean, pretty much we have nightly builds, and engineering is required to essentially take those. So once a build is kicked off, we do an auto promotion to our engineering space. So everyone's eating this. So there's a bad build, someone should know, and then we'll DQ it if we need to. But typically, the goal is like you kind of live with it, and then it forces the team to fix those issues a lot faster. Is what
The
I
team
found.
lives with it, not the customer, though. Yeah, the team.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
team. Yeah. These
yeah.
are nightly builds for the team, right? And so, like I was saying, right now we're typically on like a 6 to 8 week release cadence. So essentially, we're good for a firmware every day, and then towards the end of like a milestone ramp, we'll start introducing dog food probably 2 to 3 weeks before, and so essentially that's internal outside of engineering starting to take builds on. This is typically where we find if there's any regressions on like video audio. Certain features aren't working as expected, so it still gives us 2 to 3 week cycle to fix anything, work with our ODM providers, etc., to fix those issues. And so part of that time frame too then is kind of get to start stabilizing, right? So we're being a little bit more aggressive on what goes in, what goes out in those releases. And then, but similarly, once we make that pivot, we're doing nightly. So like I have a dedicated TV, a couple of the engineering managers have dedicated TVs. They're eating those daily dog food builds. And then we promote those usually every 2 to 3 days. So QA team essentially is doing their full smoke tests and some of their automated tests within a 24, 36-hour cycle. And then that allows us then to promote from our engineering groups into our dog food groups. And then the nice thing there is once we're like, yes, this build is a release candidate, we promote that then obviously in Peridio into the production cohort, and then that's where we're setting everything to the auto scaling.
So you guys are using 3, 4 major cohorts, similar to this?
Yeah, probably 4 cohorts in Peridio. Obviously, with different hardware diversity, we have more cohorts than that. But essentially, for each hardware product line, yeah, we have probably 4 cohorts. And then we're doing our promotional stages, and then like one of the nice things with Peridio obviously is breaking that into multiple bundles. And so we have third party assets and stuff that we bundle on the TV, like video games and other applications, and those bundles are then shared across the different releases and cohorts. And
Yeah, you
that really
touched on.
helps simplify our side, right, from a QA process, because that's a reliable bundle. And so once that's been validated, that really takes a lot of burden off the QA team, knowing that that's a reliable bundle shared across the various firmwares.
Yeah, you had mentioned dog fooding, and I think that's a important thing to highlight. In all of my experience and the people that I talk to, it's very common in organizations to have the process to have there be subtle but critical differences in the update process versus going out to production versus internally. And to be clear up front, that's not ideal. You don't want the process of update delivery to be different, or
Yep.
at least not totally different between those streams. But that kind of requires, upfront thought process. It requires your tooling to support that. Obviously, Peridio is great for that. But it's an important problem to solve.
Yeah.
Um, like, you have your team dogfooding these things. You're, looking for audio, video regressions, bugs, etc. It's important that there's nothing wrong with the process of updating itself, and you don't want the first
Mhm.
moment that you do that to be going to production. You want it to be same. You had mentioned the reliable bundles, the fact that you can test artifacts in one cohort and then one flow, and give them a stamp of approval and have those exact same things in the other flows. That all feeds into that same notion.
And Eric, you
Yeah, no,
mentioned
here. Oh, God.
yesterday, you had a very fun anecdote about how you've made it near, maybe not impossible, but near impossible to get out of the standard update practice. Can you talk about how
Yeah.
you've actually changed the hardware to make sure that everybody's on the same path?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially for like our production builds, we've locked the ability to do any sort of USB side loading, obviously console, everything that you would normally have on an unsecured device on ways to communicate and or control have been locked. And yeah, when we were talking the other day about it, I mean, one of the reasons is it forces engineers, QA, everyone to do the same update process that our customers do. And I'm a big believer in like making sure that I want issues found in engineering. Like if dog food finds a bug, that's a miss on my team.
Hmm.
And so the only way you can ensure those things is making sure that we're repeating those flows internally, and that just helps you build confidence. So every morning I'm drinking my coffee, I'm updating TVs, I power them on, they auto update. If not, then like that's the first flag, like it's time to go figure out what's going on. And so really the only thing we allow is on user debug to downgrade just so that we can then test the upgrade process prior to releasing. So otherwise everything else is locked down, and we make it extremely difficult for anyone. Like the easy path is using Peridio. Like we've made
Mhm.
that intentional.
That's what I wanted to touch on. Is there is, um, it's always important to listen to the people using your stuff. A lot of times that is through the lens of customers. Your one's team also uses your stuff,
Yes.
and it's important to like understand the feedback that comes from them. I agree with everything you're saying, but it's interesting to think about why is it so common in companies for internal teams to circumvent the formal process. It is very common for that to happen. Why is
Yeah.
that? And it's usually because the level of protection and intentional friction that you apply to like a production release flow, you want that to be super approved and cautious and correct, etc. Oftentimes it's a different mindset when you're a firmware engineer, in an office or a room somewhere working on something, and you're just trying to get the next build to a
Yeah.
TV. The mindset is different. You're like, I'm okay. In fact, I want to know if something went wrong, but let me get there quick. And people circumvent the process when there isn't a good way to achieve that. Um, Something that we've been collaborating with Telly on, and released a little while ago, is this concept of bundle overrides. And without getting too far into the weeds, Peridio has features that allows you to have this super secure flow. You can put all of the seatbelts on it you want, but that in the correct places for the correct people, you can dip out of that, still using Peridio, still with all of the observability, but allow a faster cadence to happen where you want it to happen. There's even novel approaches. You wouldn't do it exactly like that, maybe, but there's even novel approaches for production fleets. If you think about cases where you have, customers with a certain firmware build, and maybe they experience a very strange issue. It's, super unique to them and it's very strange. You might want to lasso some small group of customers and put them onto a build where you're either trying to fix for them or there's some debug thing involved for them. There's all sorts of use cases like that. But
Yeah.
the critical point being the tools have to support that. Otherwise, you do end up with side loading.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's interesting when we're approaching opportunities or new customers. Our primary competition is not necessarily insert device management platform X. I mean, sure, there's a little bit of that, but it seems that most of the market, and at least legacy thinking on this, is people doing this in house. And they're like, hey, I'm going to just I'm going to slap something quick and simple together on AWS IoT, whatever, and just uh, do something that can scale to thousands of devices, maybe millions of devices, but there's not a lot of like granularity or really much controller rollback. And so, like Eric, you'd mentioned yesterday around firmware update, like it's more or less a separate product line that needs maintaining. Can you talk a little bit about that? And like you've done this, before Telly, you're doing it
Yep.
now, and like obviously you're a happy customer and would lean into this, but like what could you share about like the other features and what's required that people are going to be missing early on if they build it themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think, historically, right, like it's hard to sell to the other departments, finance, your CEO, why you need to invest engineering and resourcing into a reliable system to deploy, right? And I think we said earlier, it's like in some ways, these hybrid software companies, like you're only as successful as getting your software out to your hardware, right? So for me, like we can't make users excited about the new feature that we're building without a reliable system. And that takes work, right? Like I think everyone in the industry knows that, that you will always have a certain level of tech debt or issues arise or scaling issues. And it's really hard to be like, I need a dedicated team of 5 to 10 people for this feature that no one really sees, and it's hidden a little bit from, you would say, the other parts of the organization, maybe outside customer support, who are probably as dialed in as engineering and DevOps. And so it's just really hard to maintain, right? And it's like, I don't know your guys' company size, but I guarantee it's a lot larger than the 2 to 3 people I have dedicated to this on my side. And I think everyone on this call could probably be like, yeah, I can get something download, I can make it secure, but now you're talking about failure scenarios. You're talking about a customer feedback process support, or your dashboards that you need to build, or like what's your deliverability time to deliver, right? Like if I'm wide open, is it 24 hours? Is it 36? Is it 72? Is it longer? There's just a lot of questions you need to solve, and like we kind of said, evolve the process. Like I think we all kind of were aligned. It's like Telly's going to do a monolith, and then we're going to start breaking it, and there's work on your guys' side, and there's work on ours, and it's just a much larger scope for something that is so critical, most likely, to the hardware business,
Mm.
that you want to have something that's reliable. I want you guys to be invested in your product to make my life easier. And as coming from a very, very large organization with millions of units, it's all about new user features. It's not about building out the best firmware downloader and release management tools.
And
Daniel, I
important.
think Daniel, you've had some fun experiences,
We'll
insights that
just
we've been able to give
yeah,
customers.
and I can kind of touch on that. It's important in the areas that Eric is describing and beyond. It's important throughout the product life cycle, and you spoke about how it can sometimes be hard to convey to people why it's important. In area X, it can be even harder to convey that the earlier you go into a product life cycle. So, for example, like manufacturing line, um, units rolling off of a manufacturing line somewhere, whether that's in the US, it's overseas, or whatever. It's in a manufacturing facility. There, I think it can be easy or unfortunately common to sort of not understand the impact that a service that is handling updates can have across the life cycle. So even if you're a well-established company or you're a startup in early days, when you're manufacturing stuff, it's important that you get it right. It's hard to get things right if you don't know all of the things. Devices should probably have distinct identities. Well, when does that happen? Probably around manufacturing, you would hope. And as things are coming off the line, is that going correctly? Is that going well? Do you have visibility into that? what are your devices talking to, if anything, as they're coming off that manufacturing line? Oftentimes, it's a very small list of things they would talk to. Usually, it includes the thing that is serving updates. Peridio, is tracking the information that can help you can navigate that successfully. I think Bill is referring, there's a fun example of certificates can get mixed up if something goes wrong or reused. You might have multiple devices that are using the same certificate, or you might have them, mismatched in some way. The hardware identifier says one thing, but a certificate says another, etc. That can manifest in exceptionally confusing ways, like hard to convey how confusing that can be, observing it from systems that those devices are talking to. And, Peridio has functionality like when these devices are talking to us, we actually write that down. We remember those things. What IP address was that? Where is it? What is the certificate? Has a device identifier been referenced, from multiple certificates from different locations, and all sorts of functionality like that, that if you track it, it can be a lot easier to navigate and go, oh, look at this. There was a mistake on the manufacturing line. This cert got reused, or this identifier is like off by some amount. Having visibility into that is critical, and it's unfortunately it's really common not to have a lot of visibility into that. So, and again, that's one of those things where like you have to solve that. You have to be thinking about that up front. If the problem happens and then you go, hey guys, we should do that. Okay, well, we got 15,000 units that don't have that baked into them. You're gonna have a bad time.
I like to say that the DNA of hardware companies is just a little bit different than a typical software company. Eric, can you talk a little bit to like how many eyes are on every release at your company, and maybe like customer success, or how you guys are using some of these observability features elsewhere in the org than just from the seat of the head of engineering?
Yeah, I mean, I would say obviously we're a small company still, being around for a little over 2 years. So I mean, everyone has eyes on this. So when we do a dog food, it goes all the way up to the founder, and a lot of that's just crowdsourcing it all, right? Like, I mean, we're still a young company. Like, QA automation isn't there all the way yet for hardware testing and benchmarking, and there's still a ton of stuff we need to do in sustainability engineering. And so right now, one of our best goals is to get that right. And I want, like I said, like customer support and engineering, you got to be best friends when it comes to a hardware software product. They need to know like what our release schedule is, what our rollout strategy is, where the risks are, where they might see issues. Because it's my job to make sure that customers don't get upset with whatever we're pushing out, right? Like, yes, we want to celebrate those firmwares and those releases and the new features we're building, but you can't have regressions. Like, the interesting thing around television is the product is used for you to check out of the day, right? You had a hard day, you just want to watch something on TV. What you don't want, oh, there's no networking, oh, there's audio, oh, there's video issues. Like, they don't care. That's their time to kind of check out from their day. And so that just kind of puts the heightened burden and responsibility of making sure when we push something out, you want that to be your best foot forward, and you want someone to enjoy the product, because it's very quick in this space where someone can sour, and you see that instantly with the customer support feedback process loop. And that's, I'd say, the most vital thing on these firmware releases. Like, I have daily check-ins and with our QA team and customer support, just making sure we're not seeing spikes or anything through our customer support channel or Reddit. Like, Reddit also, especially for this beta program, I've been shocked at how much of a community was generated almost immediately. And like, half the time when we send out release notes earlier in the program, when we weren't automating release notes to customers, it was just, everyone's just like, when do I get this update? When do I get this update? And part of the reliability means we can push things out faster. So building in those signals and having confidence in that release just means we can get stuff out quicker and we can run faster.
We have a couple of current customers on the webinar today, which is exciting. And you all were very early users of the cohort-based strategies once we rolled that out. Could you talk a little bit about what that was like, moving from like a more rudimentary like targeting approach to cohorts, and maybe how you navigated that, going from quick deployments to putting on more seatbelts with a cohort-oriented strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard, I won't lie, but I think it'll be much better for new customers coming in, right? Like I think there was a pivot shift there that needed to happen, and I think on our side we didn't probably plan so as well or put as many resources on it as we thought was needed. I think the deployments was much more just a rudimentary like proof of process, like we all know in the industry like how to get a deployment out, and I think that was accurately named in deployments. And I think what you're starting to see with cohorts is the maturity of your platform, and building in some of those stopgaps or auto deployment strategies that are much easier in that, right? I mean, I think Bill and I talked to my head of QA and release, and it's like his job was really, really, really hard doing deployments, and it was extremely manual and error prone because it was manual. And so I think what we're seeing now with cohorts is a lot of this automated promotion and the ability to do automated rollouts. It's a lot easier. He's not up at 11 midnight trying to turn something on, so the next day we get a wave of installs. He can do it at 8 a.m. and be done with it, right? So I think that's the maturity we're starting to see, and some of the other features you're doing around ACLs and permission based will be even better for us going forward, just so we can lock down who has accessibility to our production cohorts.
Part of the growing pains certainly we grew through them as well. Is it's deployments and cohorts and releases, and we talk about like the difference there and the growth there and the better the better features we get, but the effort to transition to that. There's even another layer of it. I touched on this lightly before, but that difference in like friction or seatbelts that you want to introduce, between different streams of like
Yep.
prod versus QA versus dev, there's like another, what is it, needle to thread? Yeah, there's like another needle to thread here, which is not only do we want all of those things, but it would be really cool if we could dip in and out of that. We could go in between, to that thing I
Right.
was saying before about like
Yep.
the bundle overrides. Like if you want all the cool stuff of releases and you want, let me schedule this, let me phase this by percent, let me limit it to certain,
Yeah.
VIP groups or not, that's great. Can I also easily, move devices around? Can I bring them into this? Can I bring them out of that? Is it what protections do I have that a device on firmware A will never go to firmware B? That would be a bad jump. And,
Yep.
navigating that and providing that in a way that is less painful,
Yeah.
hopefully,
Well,
to our customers is from our
yeah,
side.
because I mean, like as your hardware software product matures, right, you have less lower level, you have less driver support, how integration, and so now you're just kind of talking about like services updates and stuff. And so I mean, I think one of the things like I want to get to is just like how often does our base firmware actually change, and then we can start using artifacts and bundles and doing what you're saying. And I think then it's more of an educational problem, because I think not everyone can just do that. That's a big context shift. And
Yes.
so I think it's how do you make it so people understand it? And I think too, like, I mean, I think coming from the industry, everyone is used to like your deployments, infrastructure, right? Like that. And I think cohorts is kind of like we all were able to sit back and be like, what do we really want in this industry? And like, what
Yeah.
are the pains? And there's a growth curve and a learning curve to that, for everyone. And even I think, like for me, I was just like, oh, I need to really pay attention to some of these things, because like it's there now, and how do we message it?
Yeah. And that's, obviously we would want to be able to say, it would be great if everyone could just know everything and we could jump to let's just do the perfect thing first.
Yeah.
I'm excited for that thought too. But the reality is, we're all human. And yeah, education is maybe a good way to say it, both internally and externally, of like, okay, this is what we're shooting for. This is what it requires. This is how to get there. And then you also have to meet the customer in the middle of like, where are you right now? Like, what is your team size? What sort of
Yep.
headspace can you give to this? And it makes that like path of evolution of like, well, maybe we will do the simpler thing initially. Like we need,
Yep.
or maybe not. And having a platform that allows you to like walk into the door that is the right size for you in that moment, but also allows you to get to the right thing. Wow. And then, we're over here like cooking up education and trying to like make that process easier. You need all of the things to
Yep.
be successful there.
Eric, could you talk a little bit about the team that's hands-on in this process? I mean, obviously there's firmware engineers, and we talk with a lot of those, but there's a lot of other roles in the company that probably are in here driving updates, like QA, TPM.
Yeah. So, I mean, in all honesty, I think what I was telling you, I was like, during like almost all this integration, it's been about 1.5 engineers that have been supporting Peridio. And then I'd say there's been various management, like, there's 2 or 3 of us, I think, kind of come in and give high level direction on our side. But ultimately, I mean, I would say QA uses these tools more than engineers at this point, and I have a QA manager, release manager, who's responsible for the whole release flow. And then I think another great thing that you guys have built, obviously, is with all the APIs and webhooks that you guys have. Like, we've built that into a lot of tooling, so obviously, like customer support, like the first question is always, what's their serial number? What firmware version are they on, right? And so, through some of those evolutions that we've worked on together, like we have internal tools. We're working now to hook that into Zendesk, and so like that. They're not in necessarily the Peridio console, but they're similarly using it as a source of truth and source of record. And then obviously we get into the whole other fun conversation of ERPs and stuff, but that'll be another day. But yeah, I mean, our logistics team uses it, right? Similar tools, like we're building tools around this for our logistics team. I think Spoff, you brought up something interesting, something we're talking about, like obviously like part of the manufacturing process. Like part of that is the ODM needs to test X percentage of the units. And so then we see those units come on, and, that would be like, oh, these units came on in China or Vietnam or wherever, you're doing your manufacturing process. And then we don't see them for 6 weeks or 4 weeks or however long it takes to get there and out to a consumer and turned on again. And so I think there's things that we can build tooling there too, and have better understanding of kind of like what's happening with your fleet and where is your fleet. I think another thing, our success metrics are around active devices, right? And obviously, we guys use you as a beacon. We have some other signals to kind of make those decisions as well. But now you're kind of into your marketing and finance side as well. So I mean, there's a lot of things, I think, using a service like this with the tooling and the API interfaces that allow you to leverage it much more than just purely a release management tool. It certainly gives you all the beacons that you need to start making some of those other business decisions that aren't just get firmware to a customer.
Yeah, you mentioned the security control, yeah, like security authorization controls is a big part of, us trying to allow people, if they want to, opt into some more complex scenarios. Do you want a manufacturing partner to have, visibility into a device or some small subset of devices? Maybe I do. Certainly, if I do, there better
Hmm.
be some serious security around that. I don't want them to see anything but what I want them to,
Yep.
So security is something that we've rolled out recently with more flexibility, in that area that's relevant. There's also another novel thing about manufacturing. It just keeps coming back. Is it often is in different parts of the world, and that can have, maybe unforeseen circumstances. Like, okay, maybe we can roll out updates efficiently in NA and SA or wherever it might be. But like, what if the thing trying to download this is in Vietnam? What is that? Is it painfully slow or is it
Yep.
not? Did you account for that or not? If you use Peridio, we are accounting for that. So just the speed of it, but also you touched on like sales and marketing. There's also metrics that can get, if you hand roll a solution like this, metrics that you might just not have or might not have in a consumable way, like how much are we egressing? Where are we egressing
Yep.
to? How has that changed over time? Can I cut that up into like interesting segments? Can I look at that by firmware, by hardware model, by location, et cetera? Like those sorts of things all become interesting, when you're sort of in the middle of your
Yep.
journey, and it would be hard to add them at that point. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's cool to see
Totally.
the devices being added to the platform, and there's like the spike when they're being manufactured, and then when they start coming online and seeing those like connection bumps. Yeah.
Yep.
A super brief anecdote on that is I remember having internal conversations around the importance of like how specific we should, how specific we should be. Like, do we want to show devices last connection? Do we want to show like the last connection of all active devices? There's like, I'm thinking of graphs we have in our dashboard where
The
there's
answer
like,
is yes.
yeah, exactly. The answer is I actually want all of those things. I might care about one versus the other on any given
Yeah.
day, but yeah, you end up wanting all of them.
Yeah.
So it's funny how
But
that.
yeah, I mean, a lot of that's just doing triage, right? Like there's a signal that something might be wrong, and so now you have to do the analysis, and
Mhm.
you don't know what graph or what section or what you're looking for necessarily, so you just kind of need to see patterns and see if anything is an outlier.
Yeah, if you just show, connections over time, you're just going to see a graph and you're going to be like, I like it when the number is
Yeah.
high. But if you look at like last connections, when did devices last connect, and you see a little hump on the graph moving to the left, you're like, what's that? What
Yep.
are what are those 5,000 devices that connected one time 3 months ago and never since then? Oh, well, maybe that was a manufacturing cycle. That was all their first boot.
Yep.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think also too for people that are like bringing on a new deployment system, or or just building out a new hardware product line, right? Like, I kind of waited for the foundation to be installed, and then I think I don't know, it was probably 6, 7 months ago. I was just like, our KPI benchmark is 95% of all devices have to be installed after 7 days, right? And I can't remember the exact number, but we weren't close. And my team was just like, what are you doing? I was just like, this is the goal we have to hit. I was just like, and once we hit it, then we're going to raise it to 98, and but I think that North Star really helped with our conversations with you guys as well, right? Like, because otherwise you can be like, I want to build everything, but if that's the North Star, then I think it just helps with that focus, and I think that benchmark itself that built out our roadmap for like the last 6 months working with you guys.
Hey, you have to have a goal that you're not meeting. That's the
Exactly.
point. Is the point of it. You have to
Exactly.
have a goal that you're not meeting to look at and go, well, why aren't we? What
Yeah.
is the friction? Where should we
Yep.
prioritize time? Yeah.
Well, we have just about 15 minutes left. Going to open up to questions from the audience. I also have a lot more questions, so I'll keep rolling. But if anybody has anything specifically around Peridio or scaling IoT systems in general, also Eric is probably one of the top 10 spenders on AWS IoT of all time. So if you want to know anything about scaling those systems, also very open to whatever you want to talk about. So type in chat. So on the topic of metrics, or waiting for any other questions to come in, what have been the metrics that have had the biggest impact for you, Eric? Like, what do you guys actually watch, like maybe for a given release?
So we lever, well, like I said, one is the metric I just said. Like, I want to make sure units that are being powered on after a firmware has been enabled are actually taking the updates, right? That's the first one, and then as you do any slow rollout, any sort of observatory system you use, like we use Sentry. We're looking for spikes and anything, right? Like a tvOS is a big system. There are a lot of services running, and you might not catch a regression. So like we have filters based on firmware versions, and like we review those weekly throughout our development cycle, dog food cycle, and then obviously as we do our rollout. And so at some point we'll get those automated in to build in a kill switch into Peridio. We're not there yet, but we have all the pieces to make that a thing.
How did you go about
And
designing
so,
general observability right now? Like Peridio is not like a banner observability platform. So
right.
yeah, what do you have in place?
I mean, right now, so essentially, we leverage Android TV open source. So obviously there's a lot of great things in there around their bug report, their ANRs, and their tombstone issues. So anytime we have one of those, we automatically get it deployed into an S3 bucket. So we have that information and we can review. Then, like I said, like we're a big user of Sentry IO. And so, essentially we bake that SDK into all of our services that are wrapped into Android OS. And we're using those signals, and then third, like I said, is customer support. Like, within a consumer product, you'll know almost immediately if there's an issue. Customers are not afraid to reach out and let you know. And so, like I said, like we use that through our traditional customer support channels, and then also surprisingly, like Reddit has been a big one.
There's an interesting point there that harkens back to something we said. Again, that can be like hard to miss up front, and then you realize it later. But when you're talking about like bug reporting and systems like Sentry, those systems they're great. They give you all sorts of information about, yes, there was a bug report. What was the context? What was the environment? What was the firmware
Yep.
version? And I want to highlight that version thing. It's key to what we were talking about before in Peridio, where if you are mature enough to where you can break your thing into pieces, you can bring different artifacts and bundle them together, etc. When I tested this in dev, when I promoted it to QA, when I promoted it to prod, I can tell that it's the exact same artifact being, promoted across these. What's also interesting about that is oftentimes you'll have the same artifact across, banner versions of updates. Like some piece of it isn't changing.
Yep.
That's really interesting in the context of Sentry, because if you do have a bug in one of those, finite or smaller pieces, if you see that bug, your next question might be, okay, it's in that version of that piece. Where is that piece? What of all the bundles we have, how many, what is the
Yep.
impact of that? What is the spread of that? And while Sentry will tell you what version the bug was in, Sentry is not necessarily alone going to tell you, well, where all is that piece of software? And then you can kind of use
Yep.
Peridio as like a S-bomb or whatever buzzword you want to use, but you
Yeah.
can find the answer to that question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think probably the other piece too is just from like an inbound issue, production issue. It's environment, right? And I mean, it doesn't
Mhm.
matter if you're in a warehouse IoT device or consumer. Environment is probably the cause of at least 80% of the issues, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't simulate everything in everyone's household. And you don't know what router someone has. It's funny. I think when I was at Visio, the average age of a router was like
Oh
10
God.
or 12 years old.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
then they're like, why don't I get 4K? And like, you have to go through all these things because, not everyone, they're not in the industry. And so it, it certainly puts a unique perspective on, trying to build out these consumer products and make sure that they're working in households.
And it's easy to like hear something like that and engineering all day. You're like, oh, well, obviously you should have the latest,
Oh, yeah,
it's a very like in industry thought
it
process to be
is.
like
Yeah.
elitist about that. And we're not, but just that's very common. But I think what can get missed in that is maybe one has that opinion, but that doesn't matter to the customer. The customer's like, I bought a
Yeah.
product and it better work. And if you think that the answer is easy or obvious, cool. I hope I
Yeah.
feel that in the support you give me. And that speaks to what you're saying of like, how quickly can we identify or narrow
Yeah.
down what that problem is?
Yeah. And I think something you mentioned earlier, right? Like there's countless times where we will do a fix that we know is risk and take 5 customers that had that issue and do that promotion. And then we just
Yeah.
make sure that their issues fixed. We'll do more, test cycles on it for the greater population, but we fix the issue for those users. And then we got to snap them back in, right? And
Mhm.
so I think that's one of the things, obviously, with cohorts that makes it a lot easier for the snap back in because it's a little harder to kind of, get an orphan hardware device out there. So,
You've done this a few times from scratch. How do you evaluate the various AWS services that you want to pull in? I mean, you look at the landing page and there's, AWS does everything. And we all know AWS does do everything, but also so do you if you lean in too heavily. So what is like when you were starting to design the Telly stack, what were you excited to bring in and what were you looking to maybe shy away from?
yeah, I mean, I think, like you said earlier, I was a big spender on AWS IoT. I think they give you a great baseline. I mean, you can get up and running and doing communication in under a day, right? I think some of the things that they have built don't necessarily scale for consumer side, especially when you start getting into millions of units, right? And so one of the things, like I think a past life mistake was just our dependency on like IoT device shadows. It was an immediate solve for a problem, but then it locked us in. And when you start talking about at scale, that can get extremely costly. And so obviously we worked with AWS for a lot of different resolutions there, and like we ended up building our own like Elasticache like concept that like just like we try to bifurcate device shadow immediately, right?
Mhm.
And so, I think the first thing I did at Telly was just like, we're not going to go down that path, right? And I kind of intentionally was just like, let's not try to replicate, everything I've done in my past with consumer electronic devices, and more make it a forcing function to use some of these things. And I think one need that we had at Vizio was we had a mobile device that did like a remote control, and that Telly we don't have that, so that was a big forcing function for a lot of the infrastructure we had at the time. And so I think the big takeaway typically I have with AWS is like they get you through all the bootstrapping and all the infrastructure and scaling problems, right? But you still have to build your flavor of whatever is needed on top of that. They have, AWS IoT security, they have all these great things that give you the foundation, but you still have to have the conversation. What's the tooling look like? What's your console look like? And it's just like I said at kind of the beginning, those aren't things I need to be building. I need to be building a consumer product and consumer features. And so typically my thinking process is like, is this like a hidden feature, or firmware deployments is fairly a hidden feature behind the veil. And I'm just like, is there a SaaS solution? Is there a partner I can partner with that will make that their product, that will do the things that I can't do? And because ultimately, if there is a problem, whoever it be, from your boss, the CEO, founder, they don't care that you don't have the dashboard. They just want the issue solved, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, I would much rather work with someone that's building those tools, that cares about it, and is passionate about it. And, I think we're all passionate about getting firmware out to hardware and software update, or else we won't be on this webinar. And so, but it's also it's just, you want those tools and you want someone that's building them at the end of the day every day, and it's their focus.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think it's a sentiment around level of abstraction and level of investment. I don't think anyone can argue that Amazon is doing a bad job.
No.
It's a
Yeah.
losing argument. It's a losing argument. It's not, that isn't even really the question. It's more of like they're going to give you something. It's going to be great, but it's going to be at a certain level of abstraction.
Yep.
Is that sufficient for you, or do you want quality of life above that? Some of our conversation earlier in this call was around, well, hey, Perdio's got some sweet APIs. All of our engineers automated their job away, and now it's just happening in the background. And who's using it? QA and people looking at metrics and sales and whatever. And typically these personas desire and benefit from some higher level of abstraction. You don't necessarily want them logging into some AWS console to do those daily functions. But yeah, Bill, I can address briefly. I see a question in the chat. This seems to be the future in terms of firmware updates to hardware products. Does Peridio offer manufacturers the ability to get started with a few product SKUs, for example, step by step before doing a full rollout eventually? Yes, is the answer. Yeah, you can, if you want to, have one device or one SKU or however granular you want to make it, is not a problem at all. And if you love it and you want to, widen that to more, by all means, let's do that. Obviously, there's a hand wave of all of the complexity involved there. It's a more nuanced conversation, but we do have all of the features and tools such that you could target and only be impacting whatever cohort of products or devices that you want to initially. So
yeah, we support.
absolutely.
You designate by product, and then within product, you can have your own cohorts, and we can also do targets within that as well. But a lot of different ways to slice it.
It makes me think, this is from that question is from like a manufacturing point of view, but it also makes me think of potential customers of existing businesses that have devices on other solutions, and what does that migration look like? It's kind of a similar conversation there, and so are the efforts involved.
Awesome. Well, I think we're probably at a good spot for today. Really glad for everybody coming out. Eric, Daniel, thanks for joining. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to shoot me an email, direct, bill@peridio.com. Love to keep the conversation going. And I hope everybody has a great weekend and a really nice upcoming holiday season. So have a great one.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.